Thank you for taking the time to watch this episode of Life Support. If you enjoy the content, we would ask that you like it, hit subscribe, and share it with your friends. So great to have you on Life Support. This is a program where we love to tell stories because we want you to know that Jesus is with you through suffering, through trauma, through life's difficulties. And not only is he with you, he loves you and makes himself known in those situations. So I hope today will be an encouragement for you. We have a very special guest with us. Her name is Amber Fuller. She is a licensed marriage and family therapist. She is the owner and clinic director of Fuller Living. And Amber, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you. And we're going to talk about a topic that is not necessarily a fun topic, but it's an important topic.
Yes, it is.
And sometimes in the church world, this is a topic that doesn't get enough attention. And we're going to talk about sexual addiction. And we're going to talk about how we can help those that are moving through that and some of the warning signs maybe and so forth. But Amber, you have a story, and this is more than just clinical to you. This is personal.
Yes.
So wherever you feel comfortable starting, why don't you tell us that story, and we'll get some context, and we can talk then about how we can help others that are struggling with this issue.
Sure. I think the most fun place to start this story goes back to when I was in high school. I was born and raised in the church. I'm a pastor's kid. And having grown up in the church, I was able to see how pornography and sex addiction and all of that, which is in that avenue, affects people in the church. And at a really young age, I have no idea why. The Lord's calling, probably. I was really interested and intrigued by the effect that it had on people and their marriages and their families. And so I started that in high school and started researching, started gathering information, decided to go to college, went to North Central University in downtown Minneapolis. And part of their program was that we had to do they call it a senior project. And my senior project was actually on the effects of sexual addiction, the disclosure of it, how it affects men, women, and their families. And I share that because, it'll make sense later on in the story. Graduated, got married my husband, and we've been married for 13 years. 12, been together for 13 years. We just recently celebrated an anniversary. It's terrible. This is like a man thing to not remember that, but I don't remember.
It's okay. It's COVID. We can get away with anything during COVID.
Blame it all on COVID.
That's right.
Yeah. So we've been married for a while. And when I was a year and a half into our marriage, I actually had at the time, he's now 11. So we got pregnant pretty quick after we got married. I don't know why now that I look back on it, but we did. We can't take it back. So
yeah.
My son was, I think he was like 4 or 5 months old. Things weren't adding up in my marriage. Things weren't making sense. I felt this intuitive gut feeling, I think, that a lot of people, both men and women, that I have met with actually as clients have identified that they also feel. You can't really explain it, but it's just this like, something's not right here. And come to find out that my husband had disclosed to me that he was struggling with a sex addiction, and he had had an affair and all that terrible, tragic stuff that happens with sex addictions. And also we weren't in Minnesota when he had disclosed this to me. We were in Rhode Island, which is where he's from. And so it was just not fun. I flew home and got my son at the time on an airplane, and Although one of the reasons I bring that story, that part of the story up, is because we were in the airport, me and my son, and the flight attendant that had checked me in was so kind and so gracious. And even to this day, when I think about her kindness, I feel tearful, because the way that the Lord had walked me through that whole experience, was just, he was definitely there and he was definitely present. So I have this fantastic experience with this flight attendant whose kindness just oozes out of her. And then I go on the airplane and I've got this front seat with my baby, and they reserved the whole front seat for us. I shared with her a little bit of what was going on, and so she booked out the whole front seat, and the lady behind me started talking to me, and she was chatting with me, and I shared a little bit of what was going on with her. And again, just this this Holy Spirit kindness and love that I felt. And got home. Felt like a really long time to get home from what I remember, but I did get home. I'm here now. And my husband and I, through everything we'll probably talk about in this conversation, made it out of that. But what I had decided I was going to do a few months after that was that I was going to go to grad school, and I was going to do work in this area, and that I really wanted to help people who were struggling with this. The reason I shared that part about the high school and the college, the undergrad part, was because without me even knowing it, the Lord had already been preparing me to be able to handle something that I never thought I would be going through. So it's more than ironic. It's more than coincidental. It's definitely the Lord that had his hand on that. And I am so grateful for that, because what I see in my office are people who are broken, and people that are devastated, and people that really have to do this this inner struggle and this inner war. So, for example, a woman comes in and she starts saying things like, am I not fill in the blank enough? Am I not pretty enough? Am I not kind? Whatever, fill in the blank. And because the Lord had allowed me the opportunity to gain knowledge and sparked that curiosity in me, I already knew that it wasn't about me. And I didn't have to go through that, which allowed for us, I think, to dive in and get busy with the work we needed to do. And not have to mess around with that insecurity stuff.
You understood that it wasn't about you. It was an issue that needed to be tackled rather than a personal thing aimed at you. Although I'm sure that was still a part of what you struggled through. How prevalent is this?
There are multiple different statistics. Statistics work that way. I've heard the statistic that 50% of people within the church community are struggling with some kind of sex addiction. And I honestly think that statistic is a little generous. I would venture to say that there are probably more than 50%, but I think 50% is that common stat. That's
a bit of a shocker for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think it is. And
you look around church and they're all upstanding, perfect people, and you measure yourself against them.
Right.
Oh, I wish I was like them.
Yeah.
So how would you define sex addiction? What kind of behaviors are we talking about there?
I define sex addiction as an inability. I used to have some fancy definition for it. It's not so fancy anymore. I define it as an inability to control, to have self-control when it comes to participating in sexual behaviors.
Okay.
Such as excessive pornographic viewing, everything that is on the internet.
Everything that you can think of maybe is.
Yeah. Affairs. And I think it's a little bit different with the way that society looks at it. Our society as a whole, it's really controversial. some people they have the belief that like, why are we calling this a problem even? And within the Christian community or the church community, I believe that we know why it's a problem, and we know why we call it a problem, but the society struggling to view it as a problem, I think, presents us with an obstacle of educating. And part of the reason that it's an addiction is because people struggle. And the struggle happens when people are trying to overcome whatever it is that their behaviors that they don't like. And if you're not actively trying to work on something, it's not a struggle. And so because it becomes a struggle, I believe that that's why it can be called an addiction. And that struggle is the addiction part of it.
Right. So you have personal experience with this, so you understand even beyond your training what this is like. And so I'm going to venture a guess that because this is not talked about in church very much, that there's a lot of people that are isolated and trying to grapple with this on their own, which then probably creates levels of behavior that maybe wouldn't have to be there if there was a place to go and get it out into the light. Would that be a fair assessment?
Yeah, that's totally a fair assessment. I think that, or what I've observed too, is that because we don't talk about this, people in the church community, they don't talk about this. When is the last time that a church leader or a church pastor has, in front of a large group of people, said, I am currently struggling with a sex addiction of some kind? We don't hear it. We hear things like, I struggled in the past with.
Yes.
So instead of...
Maybe you might hear that. Even that's risky.
Yeah.
For someone who's preaching especially.
Yeah, and I understand too, like having to weigh out the risks attached to disclosing something like that in a large group of people. Although I think that if church leaders were more forthcoming about the things that they were struggling with, we would have the opposite of what we fear. So I think oftentimes people are afraid to come out with stuff like that because they're afraid that people will no longer respect them. And for me personally, and I know for a lot of the people that I know, when people come out with the things that they're struggling with, it does the opposite. Like I gain respect for them, and I gain a connection with them because that's what the truth does. It forms that connection, and that's what vulnerability does. So I think that if the church community was more forthcoming about their own struggle with this, as a result of that, then we would be eliminating the shame, that shame cycle that is attached to it. And I don't know specifically, I should know, but I don't know specifically where in the verse that talks about how the truth will set you free. And I've not done an exegesis on this verse. I don't know the historical facts behind it, although I do wonder sometimes if part of what the Lord wanted us to hear in that verse was not only does this truth, me, Christ, set you free, but when you tell the truth, it sets you free. Mm-hmm. And I see that. I see that time and time and time again. I see marriages that I saw my own marriage. I saw it be taken from this superficial, surface level place to a depth that not many people get to experience and appreciate. And that came as a result of going through this terrible thing. So although it was this terrible, horrific thing, it was also the best thing that has ever happened to myself and my marriage. And I am grateful that I have a husband who was courageous enough to come out with it and disclose it to me. There are people that there's this way of looking at this, and it's said that there are two ways that people disclose this. It comes like a thunderstorm, or it comes as like a tiny rainstorm where it trickles in. The truths trickle in.
Yeah.
Mine was definitely a thunderstorm.
Yeah.
I'm grateful that it was a thunderstorm. And part of the reason it was because he came out with it. And I think that if more people came out with it, again, that shame cycle would be eliminated, because oftentimes what will happen is that action is whatever that behavior is, whatever that sexual behavior is, happens. And then that shame cycle that follows it is, I'm such a terrible person. I've done such a terrible thing. And so part of this is called what is called the cognitive behavioral therapy model. So that thought leads to a feeling, and that feeling is shame. And then that shame leads to an action, and that action is to do it all over again. Yeah. And so if we were forthcoming about that stuff, I believe that it would interrupt that shame cycle.
So why and by the way, shame is Satan's playground.
Totally. Yeah.
Why the church should be a place. Now, put pastors aside here, because that's a whole nother dilemma, and we're weird anyway. But why, in a community of believers where we're supposed to be all about the grace of God, and we ourselves have been saved from horrific things and thoughts and our own inherited sin, why don't we talk about this? Why is it so secretive? Why are we afraid to enter in? Is it because of how we feel we're going to be responded to? Is it all about shame?
I think it is. I was trained with a theoretical approach, and that theoretical approach is called Adlerian. So Alfred Adler was this guy that worked with Freud until Freud got a little weird, and then Adler was like, I'm splitting. But he did gain some pretty helpful and insightful information from working with Freud. And the approach that Adler takes is that we are all searching for value, a sense of worth, and a sense of belonging. And I think that people believe that if they are going to come out with, I have this sex addiction that I'm struggling with, then at that point, their value decreases. And part of how Adler works his theory in that is by saying, like, by the age of 7, we've developed an idea and a belief about where we find our value and where we find our worth. And those beliefs are all from experiences that we've had. And he calls them mistaken beliefs. And the reason they're mistaken is because then once those beliefs are developed, at that point, we try to strive to be those beliefs in order to gain our value. So the whole problem behind all of this is that we fail to recognize that we already have inherent value. We have no more or less than the man sitting in the prison cell and the man in the White House. We are all on equal playing ground. But people believe that if they were to disclose this terrible thing, their value decreases because of those beliefs that they've formed and because of what society and the church tells them.
And there's a lot at stake. You know, you're a very unusual woman. You were willing to work through that with your husband. Not all women are. Yeah. And by the way, we should mention that women also struggle with this too, and it's not just a man's thing.
Yep.
But there's so much at stake. You know, you're risking your marriage. You're risking conceivably your job, certainly in the church world, and maybe not unnecessarily so. I mean, if you're a pastor and you're acting that out, then you're likely need to be doing something else for a living. But there's so much riding on this.
Yeah.
There needs to be safe places created where people can share, but not in secret. In other words, don't you have to kind of weigh the accountability factor with the safety factor? Because you don't want, you know what I mean? You don't want these people, hey, I'm going to share with you, Joe, and then it stays between you and Joe, and then it never gets any further, and no one's healed, and you're not held accountable. So that's a really tricky thing, isn't it?
Yeah. If there is one topic that there's really only one topic that I am more passionate about than sex addiction, and it's the topic of gossip and how it is destructive and how it destroys. And so you're right, that safety piece is crucial. Yeah, and I think to your point too, my husband actually did lose his job as a result of this. So yeah, we did see that destruction, what felt like destruction at the time, happen. He should have lost his job because of the way that he had acted, because of their written policies and procedures. But yeah, and there are groups too that are out there for there to be a safe place to talk about these things. There's a 12-step group. It's actually called Sex Addicts Anonymous. It's similar to Alcoholics Anonymous. And you go there and you don't know anybody, and they actually have it for women too. It's called COSA. And by women, what I mean is the partner who's going through the disclosure of it. I don't remember those women's names. I don't think I knew their names at the time. So that anonymity piece is there. That I think I'm saying that word right.
That's correct. You did well. Yep. Don't go back and try it again. Then you'll get yourself in trouble.
That's actually why one of the reasons why the issue is so prevalent as well, is because you can go on the internet and you can do whatever you want to do anonymously. And so that just shows the power of that privacy and the importance of that privacy. And I think that the church community sets a precedence for showing people how safe they are in disclosing these things. And I believe that needs to start from the top. And I think that if church leaders are taking information that they're hearing in the four walls of their office, and then they're talking about that with other people, we might not ever find out. Although I do believe that it has this spiritual effect, and we can sense that, and people can feel that. And so I think that like what you had said before, that leaves room for the devil's playground. And if a church leader is opening up that door, it's going to affect the church, maybe without them even knowing it or intending that. And so I do believe that it is really important for that privacy to be there and to not leave those four walls.
Yeah.
And I think that is a precedence that the church community and church leaders within the community can set within all aspects. Like if they're keeping confidential information confidential in all aspects, then I think people are going to feel safe.
Gossip is a terrible thing. All right, so I'm going to have you back next time. We got a lot more to talk about. We just scratched the surface, it seems. Tell me about Fuller Living, and do you have a website? How can we get a hold of Fuller Living, which is your practice?
We do. The best way to get a hold of us is actually to contact me, which I love. It's the fun part of my job. Is I moved out of that therapist role into more of the clinical admin role. And our phone number is 763-647-8188. We have offices, 5 different offices all throughout the state of Minnesota, and we're also doing telehealth.
Awesome. Thanks for being here. I appreciate it, Amber.
Thank you for having me.